Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the English Speaking Podcast for Beginners. I'm Anna.
And I'm Jake. Thanks for joining us for episode 3. Today, we're going to talk about some common mistakes beginners make when learning English and how you can avoid them. Let's start with one of the most common mistakes: confusing similar-sounding words. For example, people often mix up there, and there.
Oh, definitely. These three words sound the same but have different meanings. There is a possessive adjective, like in their book. There refers to a place like over there. And there is a contraction of they are, as in they're happy.
That's a good explanation. It can be tricky to get them right. Another common mistake is using incorrect verb tenses. A lot of beginners struggle with past, present, and future tenses. For example, people sometimes say, "I will go to the store tomorrow," when they mean to say, "I am going to the store tomorrow." Both are technically correct, but using going to is more common in spoken English.
Right, Jake. And it's important to know when to use each one. Using the correct tense is really important for clear communication. Speaking of which, let's talk about subject-verb agreement.
Good point. Subject-verb agreement means that the subject and verb in a sentence need to match in number. For example, you say, "She sings well," because she is singular, and sings is the singular form of the verb. But you say they sing well because they is plural, and sing is the plural form of the verb.
Exactly. And another mistake we see a lot is when people forget to adjust the verb when using compound subjects. For example, some people might say, "She and her friend goes to the park," when it should be, "She and her friend go to the park," because the subject is plural.
Yes, that's a very common error. It's important to pay attention to these details to avoid confusion. Now let's discuss another common mistake: using articles incorrectly.
Articles can be confusing. In English, we use a and an for singular nouns and the for specific nouns. For example, you say, "I saw a dog" when you're talking about any dog, but you say, "I saw the dog" when you're talking about a specific dog that's already been mentioned.
Exactly. And another mistake related to articles is leaving them out entirely. For example, saying "I went to store" is incorrect. It should be "I went to the store."
That's a good example. And the use of a or an depends on the sound of the word that follows. If the next word starts with a vowel sound, you use an, like an apple. But if it starts with a consonant sound, you use a, like a car.
That's a great point. Another common error is when learners overuse articles. For instance, they might say, "I am teacher," or "I am the teacher," when they should say, "I am a teacher." Remember, we usually need articles when talking about jobs.
Exactly. And articles can change meaning too. For example, "He is in hospital" in British English means he's a patient, but "he is in the hospital" in American English could mean he's either a patient or just visiting someone there.
So, it's always important to be aware of context. Now, let's move on to another common mistake: word order in sentences.
Oh yes, English word order can be quite different from other languages. For example, in English, we usually follow a subject-verb-object order. So you would say, "She reads a book," not "she a book reads."
Right. And if you start using adjectives, the word order can also confuse learners. For instance, in English, adjectives usually come before the noun, so it's "a big red car," not "a car red big."
Yes, and if you want to use more than one adjective, there's even an order for that. First comes quantity, then opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, and finally, purpose. For example, you'd say, "a beautiful old wooden table," not "a wooden old beautiful table."
That's a good tip, and it's something native speakers do naturally, but it's something learners should practice. Another tricky thing is prepositions.
Prepositions can be really confusing. These are small words like in, on, at, and by that show relationships between other words in a sentence. For example, you say, "I'm in the car," but "on the bus." Why? Well, there's no real rule. It's just how English works.
Exactly. And when it comes to time, prepositions are even more confusing. For example, you say, I'll see you on Monday, in July, but at 5 o'clock. So the preposition changes depending on whether you're talking about a day, a month, or a specific time.
Yes, that's something that can take a lot of practice to master. Another mistake we often see is using unnecessary words or phrases. For example, instead of saying, I really very like pizza, it's better to say, I really like pizza, or I very much like pizza.
Exactly. Being concise helps make your speech and writing clearer. A lot of beginners add extra words because they think it sounds more natural, but it's actually the opposite.
That's a great tip. Let's also touch on pronunciation mistakes. This is something a lot of beginners struggle with.
Yes, pronunciation is key. Many English learners have trouble with certain sounds, like the th sound in this and that. In some languages, this sound doesn't exist, so it's tricky to pronounce.
That's true. And the way English is written can make pronunciation even more confusing. For instance, the word though is pronounced differently from through or thought. It can be frustrating, but practicing these sounds slowly and repeatedly can really help.
Another tip is to listen to native speakers and try to mimic their pronunciation. Watching English TV shows or listening to podcasts like this one can really improve your pronunciation.
Definitely. Another area where people make mistakes is using the wrong vocabulary.
Yes, using the wrong word can completely change the meaning of a sentence. For example, some people mix up excited and exited. If you say, I'm exited for the vacation, that would mean you left for the vacation. But I'm excited for the vacation means you're looking forward to it. Common mix-up. And idioms can be tricky for beginners too.
Oh, idioms can be so confusing. For instance, saying, it's raining cats and dogs means it's raining heavily, not that actual cats and dogs are falling from the sky. And there are so many idioms in English.
Yes, idioms don't make literal sense, but they're used all the time in everyday conversation. It's helpful to learn them in context, like hearing them in a TV show or reading them in a book.
Definitely. And another common mistake is not using contractions when speaking. For example, instead of saying, I am going to the store, many people say, I'm going to the store. Contractions make your speech sound more natural.
Yes, idioms don't make literal sense, but they're used all the time in everyday conversation. It's helpful to learn them in context, like hearing them in a TV show or reading them in a book.
Definitely. And another common mistake is not using contractions when speaking. For example, instead of saying, I am going to the store, many people say, I'm going to the store. Contractions make your speech sound more natural.
That's right. Using contractions is part of natural conversational English, but remember, in formal writing, it's often better to avoid them.
Yes, contractions are perfect for casual speech, but in writing, especially in academic or business contexts, it's usually better to spell things out fully.
Good point. And let's not forget about spelling mistakes. English has many words that are difficult to spell correctly, like definitely or separate.
Oh, yes! Those two are so commonly misspelled. It's helpful to practice writing them down a few times to make sure you get them right. And don't be embarrassed if you make mistakes. Everyone does.
That's such an important reminder, Anna. Learning a new language is a process, and mistakes are part of that process.
Exactly. The key is to learn from your mistakes and keep practicing.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. To recap, we talked about common mistakes with grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary, and even spelling. These are all things that you can work on to improve your English.
Yes, and remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's how you learn and grow. The more you practice, the better you'll get.
Absolutely. Keep practicing and don't give up. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.
Yes, thank you, everyone. We'll be back with more tips and lessons in the next episode. Until then, keep practicing and stay motivated.
See you next time.
Bye for now.